a quiet Virginia town, under the pale glow of streetlights and the hushed whisper of a midnight breeze, an incident unfolded that would change everything. Two white police officers had pulled over a black woman, accusing her of a crime she never committed. What began as what should have been a routine traffic stop quickly spiraled into a far darker and more calculated act. A meticulously orchestrated setup. These officers, caught in their own hubris and blinded by prejudice, never realized that their target was not merely an ordinary citizen. In fact, she was far more than she appeared. Talia Porter, a covert CIA operative whose very presence held the power to unravel every assumption they held about control and authority. That night, as the silence of Arlington, Virginia reigned over empty sidewalks and the occasional passing car, Talia sat calmly behind the wheel of her sleek black SUV. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, exuding an aura of unshakable composure and quiet determination. It was just past midnight, and although the day had been long, a small sense of accomplishment warmed her heart. Her undercover assignment in this small town was nearing its end, and she now possessed everything necessary for a clean exit. Approaching a quiet intersection, Talia's practiced eyes caught the glint of a reflective stop sign. Years of field experience had honed her instincts to notice even the subtlest details, and in that moment, she brought her vehicle to a complete halt. With her hands steady and her mind clear, she executed a left turn onto the next street. Mere moments later, the flash of blue and red lights erupted behind her, their glow dancing off the rearview mirror as the blare of a siren shattered the stillness of the night. Yet, Taida's heart did not race. Trained for such encounters, her focus sharpened instantly. Her breathing remained steady as she observed the approaching squad car. Its headlights cut long shadows across her dashboard as she, with a practiced calm, guided her car to the roadside. She turned off the engine and calmly reached for her glove compartment, retrieving her license and registration. The patrol car eventually came to a stop right behind her, its flashing lights casting an eerie glow upon her vehicle. From within, she could discern the deliberate movements of two officers as they stepped out. The taller, square-jawed driver exuded an air of self-importance, while his shorter, stockier partner followed closely, both clad in the navy blue uniforms of the Arlington Police Department, with badges shining in the streetlight. Talia noted their names with quiet interest: Officer Brandon Carter and Officer Mark Sullivan. "Good evening, ma'am," said Officer Carter, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who believed he was in full control. He leaned slightly toward the driver's side window, shining his flashlight inside and sweeping its beam across Talia's calm, composed face. "You know why I pulled you over tonight?" he asked, his tone laced with a mixture of superiority and condescension. Talia met his gaze without a trace of hesitation, her expression remaining entirely neutral. "No, officer," she replied evenly. "I wasn't speeding, and I did come to a full stop at the intersection." Officer Carter's lips twisted into a small, dismissive smile. "Actually, you failed to stop at that sign back there," he said, his voice dripping with implication as he noted, "That's a moving violation." Though Talia's brow furrowed imperceptibly at the remark, she maintained her poise. "I'm certain I stopped, officer," she stated in a measured but firm tone. Before Carter could continue, he barked, "License and registration." Talia complied without a hint of agitation, handing over the documents in slow, deliberate movements. As he examined her papers, his eyes lingered, scrutinizing her license with a cold, analytical gaze. "Virginia plates, local address," he murmured almost to himself, then louder, "You live around here?" Talia nodded silently. It was then that Officer Sullivan, who had been lingering at the rear of her vehicle, suddenly called out, "Hey Carter, you might want to take a look back here." Carter straightened, returned Talia's documents without comment, and ordered, "Stay in the car," before turning to join his partner at the trunk of her SUV. Talia's jaw tightened as she watched the officers through her side mirror. Sullivan's low, conspiratorial voice could be heard as he pointed at something near the trunk. In that instant, an unsettling flicker of warning went through her, a sensation not of fear, for Talia rarely experienced that, but of a sharp, instinctual alert that something was amiss. Moments later, Officer Carter returned to Talia's window with a grim expression. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he ordered firmly. Talia tilted her head slightly and asked in a calm, measured voice, "May I ask why, officer?" "We have reason to believe you're in possession of illegal substances," Carter replied, his tone clipped and rehearsed. Talia's eyes narrowed at the accusation. "Illegal substances?" she echoed, her voice cool and even. "I think you've made a mistake." Carter's smirk widened as he gestured for her to exit the vehicle. Meanwhile, Sullivan had already positioned himself near the back of her SUV with a smug look plastered on his face, as though enjoying the theatrics of the moment. Talia opened her door and stepped out deliberately, her movements unhurried and graceful, as though time itself had slowed. She stood with her hands at her sides, watching as Sullivan theatrically lifted the trunk and gestured toward a small, unmarked bag sitting conspicuously at the edge. "There it is," Sullivan declared mockingly. "What do you know? A bag of powdery goodness." Talia's eyes flicked between the bag and the officers. Outwardly, her face remained unreadable, but inwardly her mind raced as she catalogued every detail. The bag, she was absolutely sure, had not been there when she left her house. A clear sign that this was a setup. Officer Carter moved closer, his smirk never faltering as he said, "Anything you want to tell us, ma'am?" A faint, calculated smile curved Talia's lips, subtle, deliberate, conveying neither fear nor guilt. "I'll save my comments for the appropriate setting," she replied softly. Carter chuckled, as if her calm demeanor were mere arrogance. "Oh, you'll have your chance," he sneered. "You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute." Sullivan stepped forward to cuff Talia, and she allowed it without resistance. Her gaze remained steady and unflinching as she said in a quiet, intense tone, "You're making a big mistake." For a brief moment, Sullivan paused, as if taken aback by the quiet power in her voice, but then he snapped the cuffs into place. "Yeah, we'll see," Carter retorted as he led her toward the squad car. "Let's see how confident you are in front of a judge." As they drove away, Talia gazed out the window, her mind already turning over her options. The officers might have believed they had secured an easy arrest, but they had no inkling of whom they were truly dealing with. The ride to the station was cloaked in tense silence, the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio the only sounds. Talia sat in the back seat, her hands cuffed behind her, her expression as neutral as ever. The fluorescent glow from passing streetlights cast fleeting shadows across her face, but her eyes remained fixed ahead. Every moment of the encounter replayed in her mind like a puzzle being assembled piece by piece. The non-existent stop sign, the smug confidence of the officers, the planted bag. It wasn't random corruption. It was calculated, rehearsed. These were not mere mistakes. They were deliberate choices. In the rearview mirror, Officer Carter's lips curled into a faint smirk as he remarked, "You don't seem too worried." His voice, edged with mockery, sought to provoke her. Talia met his gaze through the mirror, her eyes steady and unyielding, and asked, "Should I be?" Carter chuckled and shook his head. "You're either brave or stupid, lady. I've seen plenty of people act tough, but it never lasts long in a holding cell." Talia said nothing. She knew all too well how men like Carter manipulated power, bending rules to suit themselves and escaping consequences with ease. For now, she let him believe he was in control. That illusion, she was certain, would soon crumble. When they arrived at the station, the environment was a stark contrast to the chaos of the arrest. The night shift officers lounged behind their desks, sipping coffee and engaging in low voices amid the harsh glare of fluorescent lights that cast unforgiving illumination on scuffed linoleum floors and peeling wall paint. "Got ourselves a big one tonight," Carter announced loudly and brashly, drawing the attention of nearby officers. Sullivan, ever the showman, theatrically tossed the bag of powder onto the counter, exclaiming, "Looks like she's been running more than just stop signs." Talia remained silent, her eyes scanning the room as she noted the placement of every surveillance camera, the layout of the desks, and the casual camaraderie among the officers. A small station where everyone knew everyone else, bound by shared secrets and unspoken codes. They then guided her to a fingerprinting station. Officer Carter removed her cuffs and motioned for her to place her hands on an ink pad. Talia complied without a word. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and measured. A younger officer, his eyes tired yet perceptive, hesitated before asking her name in an almost apologetic tone. "Ms. Porter?" he inquired softly. "Yes," she replied evenly, and when he asked her occupation, she paused for a fraction of a moment before answering, "Consultant." It was vague enough to pass scrutiny, yet truthful enough to avoid outright deception. The young officer nodded and returned to his work, his unease barely concealed. Meanwhile, Officers Carter and Sullivan, oblivious to the growing doubts, laughed quietly as they leaned against the counter, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Talia's voice cut through their laughter like a sharpened blade. "You've got a smart mouth," she said, her tone both calm and pointed. For a split second, their smug expressions faltered. "Let's see how funny you are after a night in a lockup," Carter retorted, his voice darkening. Soon after, Talia found herself alone in a cold, dimly lit cell. The metal bench bolted to the wall offered little comfort, and the bars cast long, eerie shadows across the concrete floor. The faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she sat upright on the bench, her posture unyielding. The door slammed shut behind her, echoing through the quiet corridor. Officer Carter lingered at the cell door for a moment, watching her with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "You don't look like the type to get mixed up in this kind of thing," he said, almost conversationally, but added, "Don't worry, the courts love a good sob story. Maybe they'll go easy on you." Talia tilted her head slightly and fixed her gaze on him. "Or maybe they'll see through yours," she replied softly, her voice calm but edged with intensity. Carter muttered something under his breath and eventually walked away, leaving her alone in the cell. Leaning back against the cold metal wall, Talia exhaled slowly. She knew that her next steps had to be precise. She was not only fighting for her own freedom but also about to expose something much larger. The quiet of the cell was broken only by the faint hum of the station's HVAC system. With patience born of years in the field, she realized that her absence from the front line would be noticed soon enough. And when it was, her team would find her. They always did. For now, she had to play the part of the calm detainee, the unremarkable woman with nothing to hide. Yet every passing moment was an opportunity to observe, to gather crucial information. She listened to the footsteps of night shift officers as they passed her cell, noting their routines and patterns, and she attuned herself to the faint beeping of computers and the crackle of the radio. Every detail mattered. When the time came, she would be ready. Elsewhere in the station's break room, Officers Carter and Sullivan sat back with steaming mugs of coffee. "She thinks she's untouchable," Sullivan remarked, shaking his head. "Did you see her face? Not even a flicker of panic." Carter smirked. "Yeah, well, that'll change. She's just another name in the system now. Nobody's going to dig too deep." Sullivan added with a conspiratorial tone, "We've got everything we need. The evidence is airtight." Unbeknownst to them, a young officer from the processing desk watched silently, his face pale and his eyes darting toward the holding cells. Something about the situation did not sit right with him, but in this station, questioning senior officers was not only frowned upon, it was dangerous. Back in her cell, Talia closed her eyes, her breathing steady. Hours ticked by, though she did not sleep. Every minute was another step closer to the moment when everything would come crashing down. The storm was coming, and Talia was its calm, quiet eye. A pale sliver of dawn filtered through the narrow, high-placed window of her holding cell, casting a muted glow on the cold concrete walls and signaling the start of a new day. Talia remained seated on the metal bench, her eyes half closed in a state that was more meditative than restful. Sleep was a luxury she rarely afforded during critical moments. As the station gradually came to life, voices and footsteps drifted from the hallway outside her cell. The day shift was beginning, and Talia listened carefully, noting the distinct tones and paces of the footsteps, the subtle tells that revealed more about the people working there. A loud buzz signaled the unlocking of the cell block door, followed by the heavy echo of boots down the corridor. Talia did not flinch as Officer Sullivan appeared at her cell door, holding a clipboard and wearing his usual smug smirk. "Morning, sunshine," he greeted in a tone dripping with mock cheerfulness. "You sleep okay, or was the cot not soft enough for you?" Talia met his gaze wordlessly. Her silence unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Shifting his weight and glancing at his clipboard, he said, "You've got a bail hearing this afternoon." Tapping the paper with his pen, he added in a conspiratorial tone, "But between you and me, I wouldn't get your hopes up. Judges around here don't take too kindly to drug traffickers. Talia tilted her head, her expression remaining calm yet unyielding. "Good to know," she replied softly. Sullivan frowned, his smug confidence faltering for a moment before he cleared his throat and turned away. "Enjoy your breakfast," he muttered under his breath as he strode down the hallway. Talia leaned back against the cell wall, watching him disappear. The cracks in their facade were beginning to show. All she needed was a little more time at the front desk. Officer James Keller, a young and eager recruit fresh out of the academy, observed the scene from near the holding cell monitors. Something about the whole situation still didn't sit right with him. He had processed dozens of arrests in his few months on the job, yet Talia Porter had behaved in a way unlike any suspect he had encountered before. She was neither defiant nor aggressive. Her calm demeanor and deliberate words were strangely out of place. And then there was the matter of the bag of drugs, so conveniently placed in the trunk of her vehicle, as if it were a gift-wrapped package meant to seal her fate. Keller hesitated, his fingers hovering uncertainly over his keyboard as he recalled the unspoken rules of the station. Questioning senior officers was not something one dared to do, yet the nagging doubt grew within him. Glancing up at the surveillance monitors mounted above his desk, Keller saw the live feed of the hallway outside Talia's cell. There she sat, motionless on the bench, her expression inscrutable. Keller bit his lip, a tiny spark of resolve flickering within him. As he wrestled with his conscience, Talia made her move. Her hands rested casually in her lap, but her sharp eyes remained fixed on an old model security camera positioned just outside her cell, a camera likely outdated due to budget constraints. She waited until the hallway was clear, then shifted slightly on the bench. Hidden in the hem of her jacket was a small, inconspicuous tracker, standard issue for CIA operatives in the field. With a barely perceptible click, she pressed her hand against the fabric, triggering the device and sending a silent signal to her team. She did not need to speak. They would know exactly what to do when they met in the break room. Back in the break room, Officers Carter and Sullivan sipped their coffee and bantered casually. "You see Keller earlier?" Carter remarked, shaking his head as if amused by the rookie's behavior. "Kids are always weird, always thinking they'll rat us out." Sullivan smirked but narrowed his eyes, adding, "Still, keep an eye on him. Last thing we need is some rookie sticking his nose where it doesn't belong." Their laughter echoed through the room, oblivious to the storm that was brewing just beyond their understanding. In a nearby office, a nondescript black sedan pulled up outside a plain building. Inside the car, Talia's team prepared for their next move. They had intercepted Keller's secure email exactly as planned, and now they possessed the evidence needed to proceed. "Let's make this clean," instructed the team leader, adjusting his tie with meticulous care. "No unnecessary disruptions. We need to expose this from the inside." As they stepped out of the car, the sun glinted off their badges, proclaiming them as FBI agents. Though Talia could not see them from her vantage point in the station, she knew they had arrived. The storm was no longer merely brewing, it was here. The atmosphere in the station shifted abruptly as the front doors opened. The agents walked in with measured, deliberate movements. Their black suits were crisp, and their badges gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. The lead agent, a tall man with graying hair and a stern expression, approached the front desk, his eyes scanning the room with quiet authority. Nearby, Officer Keller, still at his desk, froze mid-typing as his heart pounded. Unsure whether his racing pulse was due to fear or relief, he watched as the lead agent leaned over the desk, speaking in a hushed tone that only a few could hear. At that moment, the desk sergeant, a burly man with a gruff demeanor, instinctively reached for the radio on his shoulder. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice wary. The agent replied in a steady, clipped tone. "Federal investigation. We need access to your records and holding cells immediately." The sergeant hesitated, exchanging a glance with another officer. The sudden arrival of the FBI was unusual, even disruptive, but there was no protocol for outright denial. "Fine," the sergeant muttered, gesturing toward the hallway. "Follow me." Keller watched the exchange, his palms slick with sweat, realizing deep down that the email he had sent had triggered this response. He had not expected such swift and visible action. Meanwhile, Carter and Sullivan stood near the break room door. Their earlier laughter had faded, replaced by hushed whispers and furrowed brows. For a split second, Carter's eyes locked onto Keller, and the rookie quickly looked away, refocusing on his screen. The air in the station had grown thick with tension, suffocating in its intensity. Agent Daniel Price, the lead investigator, stepped into a small, dimly lit interrogation room, accompanied by his team. A second agent wheeled in a cart carrying a portable server loaded with several hard drives. Without wasting a moment, they connected the equipment to the station's network and began sifting through digital archives. Agent Price leaned against the wall, his arms folded as he observed lines of code and file names scrolling across the monitor. Whenever he asked the tech agent, a sharp-eyed young woman, for details, she nodded and confirmed. "Plenty. Their case files are riddled with inconsistencies, repeated arrests, identical narratives, and gaps in procedure. This isn't just bad policing, it's systemic." Price's jaw tightened and he said firmly, "Pull everything. I want every record, every report, and every piece of evidence tied to Officers Carter and Sullivan." Back in her cell, Talia heard the faint murmur of activity beyond the hallway. She could sense a subtle ripple that signified her team's impending arrival. The waiting was almost over. Shifting slightly on the bench, she noted that the cuffs on her wrists had left faint red marks, but she paid them no mind. Her focus was entirely on the moment ahead, when the truth would finally be exposed. In the break room, Carter paced back and forth, his coffee forgotten on the counter, while Sullivan leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, watching his partner with growing unease. "You think this is all about her?" Sullivan finally asked in a low voice. Carter stopped pacing and said, "Of course it's about her. Why else would the feds be here?" Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. "You think they know?" Carter scoffed dismissively. "There's nothing to know. We did everything by the book." Sullivan muttered, "Yeah, sure." At that moment, Agent Price emerged from the interrogation room, flanked by two other agents. Clutching a folder filled with printed reports, he made his way purposefully through the station. His expression was unreadable as he approached the bullpen, where Carter and Sullivan were still engaged in quiet conversation. The agents moved like sentinels around the room. "Officers Carter and Sullivan," Agent Price said in a voice that cut through the air like a knife. "We need to speak with you." Carter attempted to maintain his composure, forcing a smirk as he stepped forward. "What's this about?" he asked in a casual tone. "We've got nothing to hide," he added. Price did not blink. "Good," he said. "Then you won't mind answering a few questions." The room fell silent as the agents escorted the two officers toward the interrogation room they had occupied moments earlier. Keller, now trembling slightly, watched the scene unfold. His heart pounded as he noticed cracks forming in Carter's facade and the tension in Sullivan's shoulders. The once confident duo now looked like cornered animals. Minutes later, another agent arrived at Talia's cell. The door buzzed open, and the agent stepped inside with a neutral yet respectful expression. "Miss Porter," he said, "you are free to go." Talia stood smoothly, her movements deliberate and graceful. She met the agent's gaze, nodded slightly, and stepped out of the cell. As she walked toward the front desk, the oppressive weight of the station seemed to lift ever so slightly, and the hallway appeared brighter. Passing by Officer Keller's desk, their eyes met briefly. Keller opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated, the words caught in his throat. Talia turned to him fully and whispered, "Thank you." Her voice carried an unspoken understanding. Keller's chest tightened. He gave a small nod, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. For the first time since joining the force, he felt as though he had done something that truly mattered. "Monsieur." Soon after, the interrogation room doors closed behind Officers Carter and Sullivan, and raised voices could be heard from within as the agents methodically dismantled the officers' lies. The storm that Talia had long awaited was finally here, and it was only the beginning. Inside the cramped room, Carter and Sullivan sat at a small metal table, their postures stiff and defeated. Agent Price stood across from them, his hands resting on a stack of documents. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of an overhead light. Price began in a measured tone. "Do you want to start with the arrest report, or shall we jump straight to the planted evidence?" Sullivan flinched, his eyes darting nervously toward Carter. "We don't know what you're talking about," Carter said firmly, his voice laced with defiance. Price did not flinch. Instead, he opened the folder and slid a series of printed photos across the table. Images from the station's security cameras, showing Carter and Sullivan holding the unmarked bag before Talia's car was searched. Carter's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. That doesn't prove anything. We were securing evidence, he said. Price raised an eyebrow and leaned forward slightly. Really? Because these timestamps show otherwise, and we have audio recordings courtesy of Miss Porter's hidden surveillance device capturing your conversation about how easy it would be to frame her. Sullivan paled, his hands trembling on the table's edge. You? You can't use that, he sputtered. Price smirked and shook his head. No, it's not entrapment, it's justice. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. We've pulled records from your past arrests. Dozens of cases with eerily similar patterns. All of them are under review. Let me make one thing clear. You're not walking out of here today. At that moment, Carter's bravado began to crumble. His shoulders sagged and Sullivan buried his face in his hands, the weight of their misdeeds finally overwhelming them. Meanwhile, in the bullpen, Officer Keller sat at his desk, watching the scene unfold with a heavy heart. He had been called into the interrogation room earlier to confirm details about the station's processes, and for the first time he felt the heavy, accusing gaze of his superiors as they realized that someone from within had spoken out. Keller's hands trembled slightly as he approached Agent Price. Clearing his throat, he asked, "What happens now?" Price regarded him with a softened expression. "Now we clean house," he said, pausing to study Keller's face. "You did the right thing." Keller nodded slowly, a small wave of relief washing over him. For the first time since joining the force, he felt a sense of purpose. Outside the interrogation room, Talia stood near the station's entrance, watching as Officers Carter and Sullivan were led out in handcuffs. The once smug officers now looked defeated, their eyes downcast as they were escorted past their colleagues. The station buzzed with quiet murmurs as shocked glances were exchanged. Agent Price approached Talia, his expression neutral but respectful. "We have everything we need," he said. "Your work here is done." Talia nodded, her composure unbroken. "Good. Make sure it sticks," Price replied with a faint smile. Stepping outside, Talia felt the crisp air hit her face, carrying with it a sense of finality. The weight she had borne for weeks began to lift, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. In the days that followed, the fallout from the investigation sent shockwaves through the town. Carter and Sullivan's arrests made headline news. Their faces were plastered on every screen as the charges against Talia were formally dropped. Moreover, the cases tied to the officers' misconduct were reopened, and the station underwent a massive overhaul with several officers resigning under intense scrutiny. Officer Keller, now viewed as a whistleblower, received mixed reactions from his colleagues. But he held his head high, knowing that he had done what was right. This story serves as a powerful reminder that no matter how deep the lies may be, the truth will always find a way to shine through. If you enjoyed this gripping tale and want to hear more stories of courage, betrayal, and justice, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world and helps bring these stories to life. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.